Welcome and good evening, if indeed you watch this in the evening, but welcome in any case. And this is our Friday night Bible study for Friday, May 15th, 2026. They're already sending out advertisements for Memorial Day weekend, which I think is not this coming weekend starting tonight, but actually a week from now. But that's out there. A real quick word about the last song that I played in that introduction and messed up because I'm apparently not awake or something tonight, doing a real bad job of things. But anyway, the words commonly associated with it are "There's a wideness in God's mercy." The words are by Frederick Faber. The music was written in the late 19th century in the United States by a young lady whose father was a church musician. But she didn't write it for church. She wrote it for her high school graduation. And her dad encouraged her in her writing exercises. And when he heard what she had come up with, he encouraged her, and he was, I believe, the one who actually associated it with Faber's words, and it has become a familiar hymn to many. But it was actually something that she wrote for her high school graduation. Anyway, I made a great big mistake last week, and I'm here to own up to it. I did it. It's my fault. We got started late last week because I slept in. So I ran in here and I got everything going. I went ahead and did the music intro for 10 minutes like I usually do. And the since I started late, it was appropriate for me to go late. I started about 15 minutes late, so it would have been appropriate to go about 15 minutes late. But when it came to 8 o'clock, I looked at the clock over there and, oh, yeah, we need to quit. And I could easily have done another chapter in the 15 minutes we had left. And I looked at the clock and didn't remember what was going on. And, oh, well, it's 8 o'clock, we need to quit. Well, if we had been on time, that would have been appropriate. But since we were 15 minutes late, I should have gone a little further. So, and I think in the YouTube posting that I did, I wrote it that we went through Proverbs 25, and we didn't. We talked about it, but we didn't actually start it because I shut down too early. So we'll try to fix that tonight. And since we're trying to move along and get through Proverbs, I'm going to do what I can tonight to try and add to that. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings, and we thank you that we have an opportunity to set a little time aside and focus on you and on your love for us. Send your Holy Spirit to bless this and give each person the blessing they need. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Sounds like my wife wasn't aware of what was up, so she bang bang. What did I knock over? Hello.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm?
I probably should hang up because I'm off the home network.
You're what?
I just got knocked off the home network and I'm on whatever costs us money, so I'm gonna hang up.
You gonna call me back?
No, because I don't know how to get back on the home network.
Okay. Well, I can
I,
come.
I got knocked off the network back here. The computer quit, and I tried to call you, and I don't even have network for my phone, and I'm on something else.
Okay.
So it's whatever we have to pay for. So I'm gonna hang up.
Okay. I don't know if you could hear that, but my wife's having network trouble. Her computer went down in there, and I think it's time for us to switch internet providers because I'm seeing we're dropping about 63% of the frames. Now, that given our type of program here, that's not a real great disaster as long as the audio gets through and as long as enough of the video gets through so that you can see what we're reading. But this has been 3 weeks running now that I've had a lousy outgoing connection, and I don't have any trouble during the week. It's just at night when I try to send stuff out, and maybe they figured out we've been doing all this streaming, and they go, "Oh, we got to throttle that down, make them pay for more." Well, no, I'm going to switch providers and pay less. Thank you. Anyway, so let's go ahead and switch to this, where you can see what we're doing, and you can read along with us, hopefully. And we talked about this briefly last week, that these Proverbs that we'll be reading in the chapters following chapter 25 here were collected by the advisors of King Hezekiah of Judah. Now, why these didn't make it into the original portion, not entirely clear. Apparently, Solomon himself chose what he thought was the most important and put it together. And then Hezekiah's men said, "Hey, we found all these other things. We think some of these things are also important. We're going to add them." Whatever. It is God's privilege to conceal things and the king's privilege to discover them. Now I'm going to interpret that in the light that the Hebrews in Solomon's day attributed everything that happened to God. Well, if it happened, God did it. So if the facts for a particular case are obscure, he might think, well, God did this, that's his privilege. But guess what? I'm the king. I'm the arbiter of justice. I'm the one that has to make things happen according to justice and what is right. So I'm going to discover what really happened here, even if God concealed it. No one can comprehend the height of heaven, the depth of the earth, or all that goes on in the king's mind. Remove the impurities from silver, and the sterling will be ready for the silversmith. Remove the wicked from the king's court, and his reign will be made secure by justice. And maybe, as I read that, it occurs to me that maybe the king came across a situation where he discovered corruption amongst his own advisors. And so he removed them from their positions of trust and sent them back into the country to be the farmers they grew up to be, most likely, and made this statement. Just like you have better silver when you remove the impurities, which is done by heating it up until it melts, and then the impurities will float to the top and can be skimmed off. and then he applied that process to what he had just done. Remove the wicked from the king's court, and his reign will be made secure by justice. In other words, there won't be these people there trying to pervert the course of justice. I have removed them, and this should help the people respect me. And, well, they probably did to some extent, but they were also off put by the heavy taxes that supported Solomon's excessively lavish lifestyle. But anyway. Don't demand an audience with the king or push for a place among the great. It is better to wait for an invitation to the head table than to be sent away in public disgrace. Now, Jesus made a very similar statement, and he may have had this proverb in mind when he said it, because he went to some sort of feast or banquet, and he noticed people pushing toward the front, wanting to get what they considered the best seats. And so he told them a little parable. He says, when you go to a feast, don't be pushing for the highest seat. Otherwise, somebody more important than you might come up, and your host will have to come to you and say, I need you to move down here to the lowest place so this person can have the place you took. He said, rather, what you ought to do is come in and take the lowest seat. And then when the host comes in, he sees you down there and he says, you don't belong down there, you belong up here, and you will be elevated in front of everyone else. Now, doing that for selfish purposes in order to get that adulation would be about as selfish as fighting to get the front place. But the logic remains, both in this proverb and in the parable that Jesus gave. Just because you've seen something, don't be in a hurry to go to court. For what will you do in the end if your neighbor deals you a shameful defeat? I'd like to read that in another version, just because I don't recall hearing it in exactly that way. What you have seen with your eyes, do not bring hastily to court. For what will you do in the end if your neighbor puts you to shame? In other words, you see something, you misinterpret it either because you didn't see it all, or you made assumptions about what led up to it, or you saw it through the lens of your own experience, and that wasn't what really was going on. And then you rush off to court and say, I saw this. And the neighbor that you're accusing is able to prove that that wasn't what happened at all, and you go away in a shameful defeat. Similar idea to the previous pair of verses, verses 6 and 7 up there. Don't be pushy to get up front. Wait for an invitation. And in this case, don't rush off to court just because you've seen something. You might end up being shamefully defeated. Verses 9 and 10. When arguing with your neighbor, don't betray another person's secret. Others may accuse you of gossip, and you will never regain your good reputation. And that's a recognition of a very human approach to life. We get into an argument with somebody and we may get triggered and our limbic brain kicks in, and then we feel like we have to win at all costs. Our rational brain has been shut down by the features that evolution has added to our makeup. So now the rational brain isn't working, you're not thinking clearly, your limbic emotional brain is telling you you've got to win this argument. And so you say things that you shouldn't say. And you reveal information that was given to you in confidence. You betray that confidence. You betray the person who confided in you, all just to win an argument, and you probably in the end won't win the argument anyway. And now that you have this reputation that you can't be trusted, well, this says you will never regain your good reputation. Timely advice is lovely, like golden apples in a silver basket. And you may be more familiar with the King James version of that particular proverb, which says, "A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in pictures of silver." To one who listens, valid criticism is like a gold earring or other gold jewelry. Trustworthy messengers refresh like snow in summer. They revive the spirit of their employer. So 11 and 12 kind of go together. They both state about the same idea. And then 13, it could be, it's got a very colorful metaphor there for the illustration, snow in summer. But this is the trustworthy messenger, someone who can be relied on. And it may have been that Solomon heard a case where a messenger was not reliable and let their employer down. A person who promises a gift but doesn't get it is like clouds and wind that bring no rain. Now, that metaphor at the end, or that simile, because he uses the word like there, that simile at the end of that couplet is similar to something that was used in the New Testament. If we go to, I think we'll find it in the book of Jude. Yes. Jude verse 12. These men are blemishes at your love feasts, eating with you without the slightest qualm. Shepherds who feed only themselves. They are clouds without rain, blown along by the wind. Autumn trees without fruit and uprooted, twice dead. So that simile, clouds and wind that bring no rain, got used in Jude to talk about false teachers. Patience can persuade a prince, and soft speech can break bones. Now, last week we read a verse that talked about honey. Here's a slightly different take on it. And it's probably being used as a metaphor for something, but it stands by itself in this case. Again, I don't think Solomon was talking about actually eating honey, but here's what he said. Do you like honey? Don't eat too much, or it will make you sick. And that's simply a warning about excess in anything. We live in a culture that very often seems to think if a little is good, well, a lot must be better, right? Well, it's nice to have enough money to live comfortably and not be wondering where your next meal's coming from. That's nice. That's good, right? So if that's good, well, a whole lot of money must be better. And they drive themselves to almost insanity trying to get more and more money, way beyond what they actually need to live a reasonable life. Now, this may go in hand with verse 17, which says, don't visit your neighbors too often, or you will wear out your welcome. Again, the idea of doing something in moderation. Yeah, visiting your neighbors, that can be a neat thing. Camaraderie, human fellowship, sharing information about what's going on in the neighborhood. But if you're there all the time, you can drive them nuts and they don't want to have you come around. So don't wear out your welcome. Don't overdo things. Verse 18, telling lies about others is as harmful as hitting them with an axe, wounding them with a sword, or shooting them with a sharp arrow. And it could be that Solomon had sussed out somebody lying in court, and the lies that they told, he could tell, emotionally harmed the target of the lies. Going up there to the bit about the snow in summer. Putting confidence in an unreliable person in times of trouble is like chewing with a broken tooth or walking on a lame foot. You could ask my wife about chewing with a broken tooth. Singing cheerful songs to a person with a heavy heart is like taking someone's coat in cold weather or pouring vinegar in a wound. Now there's a footnote on that. See what it says. Hebrew reads pouring vinegar on soda. Well, yeah, that's quite a bit different. And it's a very different image. And who knows if there may have been an issue where somebody was suggesting that they were doing a good thing by being so cheerful and singing these cheerful songs to a person who is in distress. Hello.
I don't remember. Would you explain how if you do something harmful that affects your brain, it's as harmful as hitting them with an axe, wounding them with a sword, or shooting them with a sharp arrow? Is it that it affects the brain that it makes it as harmful? I don't remember.
Well, you're asking me something I'm not an expert on.
I know that, but we've had it explained to us.
And you expect me to remember.
Yeah, you
Okay.
remember everything.
Don't I wish?
Well, I've heard it said of you.
Now, I have a question for you. Are you going to stay or are you going to hang up?
I'm not on the network. I'm hanging up.
Okay, because I was going to put this down where everybody could hear you.
Hear me what?
Well, you're talking to me out of the speaker, but I don't have the phone over there under the mic where the other people can hear it.
Oh, I'm not on the network, so I'm hanging up.
Okay,
Bye.
bye. Okay, well, let's go back and read, because she was asking about verse 18. Telling lies about others is as harmful as hitting them with an axe, wounding them with a sword, or shooting them with a sharp arrow. And the question she was asking was, explain how doing things like that damages the brain. Now, of course, the people who are being lied about, then they're suffering the emotional effects, and they're having their own fight flight freeze mechanism triggered, which dumps adrenaline into the body, and that does in fact ultimately damage the brain. Not to mention the fact that it runs the risk of shutting down the rational brain, so that the person no longer is thinking carefully about what they're doing. They lose their wisdom in that situation. But I think what she also wanted me to talk about was what it does to the person who is harming others, because that is also a problem. Because when you act out of harmony with the way the creator designed you to operate, then you damage yourself, you damage your own mind. And I can't give you the exact mechanisms. She was asking me, I think, about that, and she doesn't remember, and I don't really remember either. So we'd have to go back and listen to somebody who does know those things. But the point is, when you attempt to damage others, you also damage yourself. And it doesn't matter how you go about damaging them. You can physically strike them, you can emotionally harm them with gaslighting, you can economically harm them through different means. All of those things end up hurting you because of your intent to cause this harm. Just a second. Okay, hello.
Hello.
You're down in front of the mic now. I answered it without picking it up.
What? Hello?
I said you're in front of the mic now where people can hear you. I answered without picking the phone up.
Oh, well, I was just going to add to what you were saying that when the person who causes the damage, if they are allowed to continue to cause, or if they continue to act in ways that cause damage to others, it sears their conscience and they no longer sees it as inappropriate behavior.
Right. And then they've got a seared conscience and they are seriously damaged.
Yeah. So the person who does the damage is actually receiving more damage than his victim.
Very often that is the case, yes.
And he doesn't even know he's doing anything wrong.
Mm-hmm. Because he seared his conscience. It no longer strikes him that this is inappropriate.
And they have used PET scans to show that when you imagine something, it has the same effect on the brain as if you are actually experiencing it for real.
Right.
And I don't remember how they worked that out, but
Well,
your brain becomes bogged down with trying to act to overcome the trauma of what you are experiencing, and with your brain busy fighting off the trauma, your system is your immunities are lowered, making your system vulnerable to other problems such as heart disease, kidney disease, high blood pressure, whatever.
Okay.
And that's where that verse 18, telling lies about others, is as harmful as hitting them with an axe, wounding them with a sword, or shooting them with a sharp arrow. You're traumatizing somebody else when you tell lies about them. You're harming them.
Mm-hmm.
And you are doing all kinds of damage to them physically by means of their brain being unable to take care of their body in the way that it should, because it's dealing with the trauma of the lie. But it is also causing you even more damage than your victim, because you grow to believe that it's okay to act in that way. Your conscience becomes seared.
And unfortunately, sometimes that searing happens in childhood when a child is raised by people who do that kind of thing. They see it being done, and we are programmed to look to our parents to know how we should live life and to understand that what they do is right. So when what they do isn't right, they are damaging us by giving us that false example and leading us to believe that that type of dealing with the troubles of life is okay and acceptable because that's what you've seen done all your life.
Well, that's where a child does not have the ability to comprehend God, and the parent is, in a way, a substitute God, in that they look up to the parent as a model for their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So what they see their parent modeling is what they're going to do, how they're going to act, how they will behave, because they believe it's okay. That's what you're supposed to do.
Right.
And that damage goes on to the third, fourth, fifth generation
Mm-hmm.
before somebody says, that's enough. It's going to stop right here.
Mm-hmm. Now, we had gotten to verse 20, and we had read the footnote about the last line of verse 20. Singing cheerful songs to a person with a heavy heart is like taking someone's coat in cold weather, or pouring vinegar in a wound, or, according to this version, the Hebrew says, pouring vinegar on soda. Verse 20. Let me see how the
Well,
NIV
you know
does
what
that.
I hear when I read that? You know what immediately comes to mind?
What?
Oh, you have a problem? I'm praying for you. And then not giving you another thought.
Yeah.
Nothing ticks me off worse than that. Somebody is sitting there heartbroken, or hurting, struggling, and they post about it, and somebody comes on, oh, praying.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're not praying. You don't care. You just want to look good.
Yeah, the NIV does translate it vinegar poured on soda. Now, vinegar in a wound probably would burn pretty bad, although the acid in it might be helpful in disinfecting the wound. But vinegar on soda, I think most of you know what would happen if you did that. So
I don't.
you don't?
No.
Vinegar on baking soda. Um, it is a pretty violent reaction. It's kind of like putting Mentos in a Coke.
Oh. Kind of like putting stevia in a whatever it was you made for me this morning.
Well, it wasn't the stevia that did that. It was the order that I poured it.
Oh, okay.
Several years ago, my wife came across a recipe that involved um, the sparkling ice type drinks,
It's water.
right? Um, the heavy whipping cream and a little bit of sugar-free sweetener. In our case, we were using sugar-free maple syrup. Of course, it's imitation maple syrup, but it's sugar-free.
Oh, that's what the recipe called for.
Right. Um, if you do that in the right order, namely put in the cream and the sweetener first, and then add the sparkling water, it will froth up, and you'll have foam at the top that you can actually scoop off with a spoon and sort of eat before you get down to the drink part.
The longer you let it set, the thicker the froth becomes.
Well, yeah, you can actually do that and then stick it in the fridge and have even more of an effect. If you don't do it in that order, if you start with the sparkling water, it doesn't work like it does otherwise. And I learned that again today because my wife is taking a liking to mixing almond milk and her Coke. And normally I would take her big cup and pour the Coke into it down the side so it didn't bubble up and froth a whole lot, and then pour in the milk. And we started adding a little powdered French vanilla stevia, a couple of packets of that, stir it up in it, and it makes a drink that she likes so much she tends to guzzle it. But last night, this morning sometime, I did that, and I started with the milk. And then I poured in the Coke. I ended up with a mess all over the counter because it made this big heavy froth, and it just frothed up all over the place and ran down the sides of the cup. And I had to clean up the counter, and I couldn't put in all the bottle.
Yeah, you should have heard him. He was screaming and dancing and oh, I can't believe it's doing this to me. Oh, help.
So from here on out, when I do that for it's Coke first, then the almond milk. Here's a verse that gets repeated in the New Testament. If your enemies are hungry, give them food to eat. If they are thirsty, give them water to drink. You will heap burning coals of shame on their heads, and the Lord will reward you. Now, I once heard an interpretation of this verse that the burning coals were actually the help you would give to somebody who had let their fire go out. And they would come with some sort of fireproof basket on their heads looking for help. So you would take some coals out of your fire and put them in that container on their head and send them back home to start their own fire. Well, it was an interesting...
Can I bring this home a little bit?
Sure.
Where we lived once in the past, there was a woman who couldn't stand me. And she would tell people, that Renee, I really can't stand her, blah, 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 blah. And I knew she was saying these things about me. And she didn't live far away, so I called her one day and I said, hey, lady, I won't say her name.
Mm-hmm.
I made soup today and I made too much. Why don't you come have lunch with me? And she was a little surprised that I had called, and she agreed to come. And she came ready for a fight. And I invited her in, and I didn't mention anything at all that there was any kind of tension between us. I treated her like she deserved to be treated with respect and dignity. And I fed her my famous potato soup, which she loved. And, after that, she was one of my biggest advocates. If you treat somebody nice, the way that they deserve to be treated, the way they, with dignity and respect, then you're gonna win more flies with honey than you are with vinegar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So don't tell lies about people because you're gonna hurt them. Instead, say nice things about people. Lift them up. Make them feel good. And if you absolutely cannot find anything good to say about somebody, don't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was another time I had a real problem with a pastor. I had a real problem with this guy. And somebody advised me that if I couldn't think of anything, that I needed to pray for the guy. And if I couldn't think of anything good to pray for him, ask God to give him something that I wanted for myself. Well, this guy was bald, and I was beginning to have hair loss. So I started praying that God would give him back his hair. And then when I'd look at the guy, I would think of what I was praying. And I've got the kind of imagination that I could imagine him waking up and finding hair growing on top of his bald head, which was male pattern baldness that you don't do anything about. And him being all confused and wondering, why is his hair growing back in? What's wrong with me? My hair is growing back. And going to the doctor and spending thousands of dollars trying to figure out why his hair was growing back. All the time it's happening because somebody is praying that his hair will grow back in. I mean, my motive was evil, but it helped me get over a lot of those bitter, hard feelings I had toward the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I will let you know that I looked him up on Facebook about a year ago, maybe, and he's still bald. And I almost am now too.
Verse 23, as surely as a north wind brings rain, so a gossiping tongue causes anger. Now, think about where they were. Israel is essentially a coastal climate. They're just off the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And so the prevailing westerly winds would be blowing moisture from the Mediterranean Sea across Israel, across the land there. Now, if a north wind blows, it's bringing cold air down to mingle with that moist air, and when air gets colder, its ability to carry moisture is reduced, and you can very often end up with rain. So, as surely as a north wind brings rain, so a gossiping tongue causes anger. And this is one of those, we probably didn't really need a proverb to tell us this, but sometimes we forget. And the obvious isn't so obvious to us. It is better to live alone in the corner of an attic than with a quarrelsome wife in a lovely home. And we could take that both ways. We could degenderize that with a quarrelsome spouse in a lovely home. Good news from far away is like cold water to the thirsty. If the godly give in to the wicked, it's like polluting a fountain or muddying a spring. Now, here's another honey verse. And again, it's used as a metaphor, and the metaphor will be right here in verse 20. The object of the metaphor, the lesson it's teaching, will be right here in the verse itself. It's not good to eat too much honey, and it's not good to seek honors for yourself. And then finally, for this chapter, a person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls. Next chapter. Honor is no more associated with fools than snow with summer or rain with harvest. Well, rain at harvest time can be a problem, particularly with grain, because once grain is ready for harvest, the stalks are dry and they don't have the resilience of green stalks. The green stalks can bend, and because they're green, they can straighten themselves back up. Once that stalk turns dry and brittle, mechanical action can cause it to break and drop the grain onto the ground. So rain at harvest can be a problem. So can hail. Hail can do serious damage to a grain crop just before harvest. Like a fluttering sparrow or a darting swallow, an undeserved curse will not land on its intended victim. And you may have seen birds that it seems, and I don't know why they mentioned the sparrow here, because that's not so much them, but the swallow. The swallows and to some extent the swifts, they don't ever seem to land. They're forever flying about. They eat on the wing because they're essentially flycatchers. They fly around, grab insects right out of the air, and they can just keep flying around. The swallow and the swift in particular are very good at that. I don't know why it mentions the sparrow, but certainly the swallow. And that is used then as a metaphor for an undeserved curse. You're trying to curse somebody, but they have a solid reputation and nobody believes you. And so the curse does not land on its unintended victim because it's undeserved. Guide a horse with a whip, a donkey with a bridle, and a fool with a rod to his back. Now, there's another instance where Solomon's intention for mentioning a rod should be pretty clear because it's being applied to the fool's back. And he's likening it to the whip and the bridle. Don't answer the foolish arguments of fools, or you will become as foolish as they are. I think I like the wording of the NIV in that case. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you will be like him yourself. Yeah. Somebody wants to run off their mouth in a foolish way, don't argue with them. You can end up looking as foolish as they do. But here's a counter instruction. Be sure to answer the foolish argument of fools, or they will become wise in their own estimation. It's almost like the writer of these Proverbs, Solomon, I assume, since this is an extension from what we read back there in chapter 25, is telling us that we're damned if we do and we're damned if we don't. Because if you answer the foolish arguments of fools, you end up looking foolish yourself. But if you don't, they go on and think they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now, if you were to ask me, I would say the latter error is a whole lot less problematic than the first error. Much better to let them become wise in their own estimation, because at some point they will get so wise in their own estimation and so arrogant that their arrogance will destroy them and they'll be seen for the fools they are. Trusting a fool to convey a message is like cutting off one's feet or drinking poison. In other words, you'd be better off not sending the message at all than trying to ask a fool to convey the message. A proverb in the mouth of a fool is as useless as a paralyzed leg. Now this is interesting because in the King James they actually use the word parable there. 26 verse 7. The legs of the lame are not equal, so is a parable in the mouth of fools. I don't know if he really did it, but my dad used to tell about having a Baptist preacher confront him with the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, saying what you are teaching about the state of the dead can't be true, because here's what Jesus told in his parable. And my dad suggested he read Proverbs 26 verse 7. And he was dumb enough to open it up and read it right there in front of everybody. The legs of the lame are not equal, so is a parable in the mouth of a fool. I wonder if perhaps Solomon had a case where somebody had tried to cite one of his own proverbs in defense of his position. And Solomon's response was, if you're a fool, you can use my proverb, but it's useless. It's like the uneven legs of a lame person. Honoring a fool is as foolish as tying a stone to a slingshot. And let's just see how that is in the King James, what it says, because I've got an image there, and as he that bindeth a stone in a sling, so is he that giveth honor to a fool. That's what the King James says. It's not as clear there. Like tying a stone in a sling is the giving of honor to a fool. Now, I don't think I ever saw it this way. Tying a stone in a sling. Well, the sling that they had in those days was generally two leather thongs tied to a little pocket. And you could place a stone in the pocket and whirl it around, and by carefully releasing one of the strings at the appropriate point in the stone's arc, you could cast that stone at something. So you might read this as saying that honoring a fool is as foolish as putting a stone in a slingshot. Well, but if we take that just a step farther, it says tying a stone to a slingshot. So you put the stone in that pocket and you tie it up so it can't come out, and then you start swinging it around. That's not very smart. You're likely to hit yourself or somebody you don't intend to because the stone can't be released. Tying the stone to a slingshot. That's the picture that came to mind for me. A proverb in the mouth of a fool is like a thorny branch brandished by a drunk. It is possible, and it does happen in our modern legal systems, that attorneys will try to use a case to make a particular argument, and it kind of backfires on them. I mentioned this to my wife. I watched a case yesterday where the plaintiff was a woman who claimed that she deserved part of a certain man's property because they had been in what is known in that state as a CIR, committed intimate relationship. And so the man's attorney was making arguments to demonstrate that there was no such intimate relationship. There was never any intercourse. They were not that intimate. They didn't live in the same house. There just couldn't have been a committed intimate relationship. Whereas the woman's attorney was making arguments trying to make it look like there was an intimate relationship. They shared an Amazon account. The only reason she was living outside the house was because the house wasn't ADA compliant and the trailer was. And the one thing that struck me, and I had to tell my wife about this, she argued that watching a television show together was a hallmark of an intimate relationship. And I was remembering back to when I was a young man fresh out of college, and I moved to a certain area, and the pastor was not there when I got there. He was out running across the country raising money for a church building. And I met his daughter when they got back. And I wasn't particularly enamored of her, but they would invite me over to their house from time to time. And I took to going over there whenever the British show All Creatures Great and Small came on. That's based on the books of James Herriot. And they had British actors taking the parts of the characters in the books and acting out some of the scenes. And I used to like to go over there and watch those. And so the pastor's daughter and I would sit on the floor in the living room and watch this. And well, it was kind of became a regular thing with us. And I'm thinking of that and I'm saying, that's a committed, intimate relationship. I'm in trouble. Anyway. Yeah, so a proverb in the mouth of a fool is like a thorny branch brandished by a drunk. Does more damage than good. An employer who hires a fool or a bystander is like an archer who shoots at random. So that kind of relates to verse 8, the tying a stone to a slingshot. Just don't look where it goes. Well, you don't know what kind of damage you might do. As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool repeats his foolishness. Okay. Maybe a little too colorful for us, but there is more hope for fools than for people who think they are wise. Why? Well, because if you think you're wise, you don't think you need help. If you're a fool and you at least have some inkling that you are a fool and you need some education, well, there's more hope for you than for someone who's decided they've already know everything they need to know. Here's one we've read very like already. The lazy person claims there's a lion on the road. Yes, I'm sure there's a lion out there. An excuse not to become active. As a door swings back and forth on its hinges, doors move, but they only move within a certain area because they're tied to the wall with hinges. So they never travel anywhere. They're stuck in place. They move, but they don't travel. Maybe I can put it that way. So the lazy person turns over in bed. Lazy people take food in their hand, but don't even lift it to their mouth. That's too much effort. Lazy people consider themselves smarter than 7 wise counselors. Well, yeah, you and I have probably run across people like that. That they're doing their best to avoid effort, trying to get what they need without personal effort. And they get so self-deceived that they really think they know reality, and they make fools of themselves in the process. Here's a proverb that got used about a certain president from many years ago. Interfering in someone else's argument is as foolish as yanking a dog's ears. Let me read that out of the King James. That's we're still in 26. Yeah, 26 verse 17. He that passeth by and meddleth with strife belonging not to him is like one that taketh a dog by the ears. Back in the mid to late 60s, there was a famous photograph of the current president, a Texas native, who had beagles as pets at the White House, actually in front of the photographer so they get a picture of it, taking one of his beagles by the ears and picking it up. And this Proverbs kind of came back to it because that president was known as the one who got the United States involved in the war in Vietnam, which some people believed was strife that didn't belong to us. Or as it puts it here, interfering in someone else's argument. And here they had a picture of him holding his beagle up by the ears or taking a dog by the ears. And they thought it was appropriate because of what he'd done. Anyway. Just as damaging as a madman shooting a deadly weapon is someone who lies to a friend and then says, I was only joking. And that's another element of human nature. People who say harmful things, who try to put other people down and deliver insults to make themselves feel better. Then if they're called on it, well, their immediate defense is, oh, it was just a joke. Can't you take a joke? As if somehow taking a joke is a virtue. Fire goes out without wood, and quarrels disappear when gossip stops. And there's some truth to that in the human realm. There are people who like to deliver the dirt on other people. I'm just telling the truth. But when those reports, whether true or not, quit going out, a lot of times the quarrels disappear. A quarrelsome person starts fights as easily as hot embers like charcoal or fire lights wood. Rumors are dainty morsels that sink deep into one's heart. Smooth words may hide a wicked heart. Footnote A, the Hebrew reads burning words may hide a wicked heart, just as a pretty glaze covers a clay pot. People may cover their hatred with pleasant words, but they're deceiving you. Well, 23 and 24 are closely related. They pretend to be kind, but don't believe them. Their hearts are full of many evils, and the Hebrew actually reads 7 evils. While their hatred may be concealed by trickery, their wrongdoing will be exposed in public. Verse 27, if you set a trap for others, you will get caught in it yourself. If you roll a boulder down on others, it will crush you instead. And that may have been Solomon pronouncing sentence on someone who had tried to harm a neighbor. And Solomon says, well, you set a trap for this person. I'm going to see to it that you get caught in it yourself. A lying tongue hates its victims, and flattering words cause ruin. It's not that it's wrong to say good things about people, but when you say unwarranted good things, that's not saying good things, that's flattery. Flattery is often done for the benefit of the person saying the words, and that can cause ruin. Anything done out of self-interest will cause ruin because it is contrary to the Creator's design for social living. Here's an idea that gets repeated in the book of James. Don't brag about tomorrow, since you don't know what the day will bring. Let someone else praise you, not your own mouth, a stranger, not your own lips. A stone is heavy, and sand is weighty, but the resentment caused by a fool is even heavier. Anger is cruel, and wrath is like a flood, but jealousy is even more dangerous. Now, of course, we recall that in the New Testament, and I think it's actually quoting the Old Testament, where it says, well, yeah, because we read it when we were in the Psalms, in your anger, do not sin. Anger itself is not sin. It's what we do with it. But anger in the human animal very often leads to cruelty, and it can given the mechanism we've talked about, where the limbic brain, once triggered, shuts down the rational brain to take control in order to protect the individual and to assure survival. Anger is likely to shut off the rational brain, and then that wrath becomes like a flood because there's no longer any thinking going on to stop it. But even so, Solomon writes, jealousy is even more dangerous because jealousy makes us vindictive. Jealousy makes us want to take what someone else has. Jealousy makes us want to destroy someone because we believe, whether rightly or wrongly, that they have destroyed us. An open rebuke is better than hidden love. In other words, be real and be out front with things. Don't be afraid to reveal who you really are. Well, hopefully you are becoming someone that doesn't have to be afraid of it. Verse 6. Wounds from a sincere friend are better than many kisses from an enemy. Now, that's 27:6, and I think that is the one that's familiar to me out of the King James. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. A person who is full refuses honey, but even bitter food tastes sweet to the hungry. I asked my wife if I could say that about roasted garlic seasoning on tuna patties. A person who strays from home is like a bird that strays from its nest. I wonder if this was a case of unfaithfulness, a person straying from home. The heartfelt counsel of a friend is as sweet as perfume and incense. Never abandon a friend, either yours or your father's. When disaster strikes, you won't have to ask your brother for assistance. It's better to go to a neighbor than to a brother who lives far away. Kind of sensible, rational advice. When you're in trouble, the closer the help can come from, the better. So if people are near you, don't turn them into enemies. Take a few lumps. Be willing to lose a few things in order to maintain the friendship of those who are near you, because they'll be a whole lot more helpful than a brother who lives in a different state. Be wise, my son. I'm sure that's what footnote A says there. And make my heart glad. Then I will be able to answer my critics. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. I think that's almost an exact repetition of something we read a week or two ago. Get security from someone who guarantees a stranger's debt. Get a deposit if he does it for foreigners. Footnote B, promiscuous woman. Okay. A loud and cheerful greeting early in the morning will be taken as a curse. The King James words that a little bit more awkwardly. See, verse 27:14. He that blesseth his friend with a loud voice, rising early in the morning, it shall be counted a curse to him. You get the picture. And that may have been a case in which somebody came to Solomon complaining he wasn't getting to sleep because his neighbor was waking him up with a loud voice, before the rooster even crowed. And the defendant in the case countered, "But, Your Honor, I was saying good things about him. I was blessing him." And the judge says, "Well, it doesn't matter whether you're blessing him or what you're saying. If you do it that early in the morning, wake him up, he's going to consider it a curse." A quarrelsome spouse is as annoying as a constant dripping on a rainy day. Stopping his or her complaints is like trying to stop the wind or trying to hold something with greased hands. Okay, interesting metaphors there for that. As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. As workers who tend a fig tree are allowed to eat the fruit, so workers who protect their employer's interests will be rewarded. I wonder if maybe that was a case where a worker felt they weren't getting properly paid, and Solomon had to say, if someone is giving you benefits, you need to reward them properly for their efforts. As a face is reflected in water, so the heart, or the character, reflects the real person. Now, we've talked about this before. People like to wear masks, and as long as their rational brain is active, they have the mental capacity to maintain that mask. But if something, a sedative of some sort like alcohol or sleepiness, exhaustion, or fright being triggered, if that shuts down the rational brain and the mask goes away, then the real person is reflected. And you've probably encountered people who, when they're drunk, don't make any sense, but they're the sweetest people. It reveals the real person. The character reflects the real person. Just as death and destruction are never satisfied, so human desire is satisfied. Sheol and Abaddon, probably. I guessed right. So human desire is never satisfied. Again, that concept of human societies tending to think that if a little is good, well then a lot must be better. So we start desiring things, and when we get them, well then we desire more. Human desire is never satisfied. We'll come upon some more colorful expressions of that concept later in this book. Fire tests the purity of silver and gold, but a person is tested by being praised. Footnote D, that's what that says. By flattery. Okay, yeah. If you let someone else's flattery go to your head and take you out of who you really are, you can reveal what's really not there underneath the mask. Fire tests the purity of silver and gold. A person is tested by flattery. You cannot separate fools from their foolishness, even though you grind them like grain with mortar and pestle. Know the state of your flocks, and put your heart into caring for your herds. For riches don't last forever, and the crown might not be passed to the next generation. After the hay is harvested and the new crop appears, and the mountain grasses are gathered in, your sheep will provide wool for clothing, and your goats will provide the price of a field. And you will have enough goat's milk for yourself, your family, and your servant girls. So, essentially, just admonition toward diligence. Pay attention. Do your job. Know what your job is. Pay attention to what's going on. Do your best to predict what might be needed so that you're prepared for it when it comes, so that you can properly care for things. And if you do that, prosperity will result. Moving on. Proverbs chapter 28. The wicked run away when no one is chasing them, but the godly are as bold as lions. Now, there might need to be an element of standard Old Covenant understanding there. But in general, when you live outside of God's design for life, then you're fearful. And you can't trust anybody. The godly, though, are as bold as lions. When there is moral rot within a nation, its government topples easily, but wise and knowledgeable leaders bring stability. And one might actually apply that verse to the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire got so full of itself and so certain that it was right, and it had the moral right to rule others as viciously and cruelly as it did, that led to moral rot and eventually to the downfall. A wise and knowledgeable leader could bring stability. A poor person who oppresses the poor is like a pounding rain that destroys the crops. To reject the law is to praise the wicked. To obey the law is to fight them, assuming the law is a just and honorable one. And in Solomon's day, he would have seen probably the Ten Commandments and the other rules made up the law of Moses as the law, and would have felt that those were divinely inspired and therefore worthy of application. Evil people don't understand justice, but those who follow the Lord understand completely. What is justice? Well, it's setting things right. Evil people know how to set things right. They don't want things right, because if things were right, it would harm them. But those who follow the Lord, who live according to the principles of love on which the universe was designed, then they understand justice completely. Better to be poor and honest than to be dishonest and rich. Young people who obey the law are wise. Those with wild friends bring shame to their parents. Footnote A. Of their father. Okay, yeah. This tended to be male-centric. Income from charging high interest rates will end up in the pocket of someone who is kind to the poor. I want to read that in the King James, which is generally more literal there. He that by usury and unjust gain increaseth his substance, he shall gather it for him that will pity the poor. Okay. And the NIV, and I need to turn a page here. He who increases his wealth by exorbitant interest amasses it for another who will be kind to the poor. Now, that exorbitant or excessive, what's the word it used here? High interest rates? That's not in the original. The Hebrew doesn't mention that. in the Hebrew, income from interest, period. Not high interest, not excessive interest. That's an interpretation by the translators, because we live in a society that wouldn't work without interest. That's just how certain things are funded. It's how our world works. We can't imagine it. So then we have to say, well, high interest, because otherwise, if we didn't charge interest at all, our society wouldn't work. And in fact, there is an argument made in geoeconomics and in economic history that the Protestant Reformation enabled the economic development that followed, because they took a different interpretation of the Bible's restriction on interest. The Catholic Church took a very hardline position. Interest at all is inappropriate. It's forbidden in the Bible. Don't charge interest. And given the human animal, that there was no reward then for people to loan their money to make things happen, and so things didn't happen. So that's the argument that goes with that. But to be accurate, the Hebrew doesn't tell us not to take excessive interest. It tells us not to take interest. Now, the other thing that I will point out, I may have mentioned this when we read back there in the book of Nehemiah. If you're going to assume that the meaning should be excessive interest, then what we need to do is go to the book of Nehemiah and find out what was considered excessive interest. Do you remember? The 100th part. 1%. You and I can go put money in the bank and get higher than 1% interest. That's just letting the money sit in the bank. That's not investing it in companies or anything like that. That's just letting it sit in the savings account. And if you loan your money out and you only get 1% interest, you're probably not going to loan your money out. Not in our society. Just let's look at our society and compare it to what the scriptures said. Not saying that we shouldn't do these things, not saying that it's wrong to charge interest, just let's be aware that the Hebrew Bible condemns interest altogether. And let's not go around talking how wonderful we are because we follow the Bible. If you're charging interest, you aren't following the Bible. All right? I'm not telling you can't. I'm just telling you don't go around boasting about doing what the Bible tells you to do if you're charging interest. If you have money in the stock market and it's growing, you're charging interest. Don't do that and then brag to somebody else about doing what the Bible says you should do, because you're not. All right? Sorry, I got off on a hobby horse there. But anyway. God detests the prayers of a person who ignores the law. I would disagree with that. God doesn't detest any prayer. Now, your prayers, if they are selfishly motivated, may not get you anywhere. Jesus told the story of the Pharisee and the publican. And both of them prayed, and God listened to one, and the other person, well, God listened, but the man didn't go away justified with God partly because he didn't think he needed it. So you don't get what you don't ask for. So you could say that God detests those prayers if they aren't fruitful, but they're not fruitful not because of God, but because of the heart and character of the person offering that prayer. Those who lead good people along an evil path will fall into their own trap, but the honest will inherit good things. There may be an element of standard old covenant understanding there. Rich people may think they are wise, but a poor person with discernment can see right through them. When the godly succeed, everyone is glad, When the wicked take charge, people go into hiding. People who conceal their sins will not prosper, but if they confess and turn from them, they will receive mercy. And read that from the King James because that might be familiar to a lot of you. He that covereth his sins shall not prosper, but whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. Forsaketh or turn from them, yeah. You try to hide the rot inside. It's just going to fester and boil up and make trouble for you. If you can be honest enough with yourself to admit, wow, I'm like that. I need help. I need to get that fixed. And then you trust God to help you turn from it. Then God responds with mercy, and you receive that mercy. Blessed are those who fear to do wrong, but the stubborn are headed for serious trouble. Footnote B, those who fear the Lord. The Hebrew just reads, those who fear. A wicked ruler is as dangerous to the poor as a roaring lion or an attacking bear. A ruler with no understanding will oppress his people, but one who hates corruption will have a long life. A murderer's tormented conscience will drive him into the grave. Don't protect him. You may recall Edgar Allan Poe's The Beating Heart, was it? Or a man's own mental processes drove him nuts until he revealed his own malfeasance. The blameless will be rescued from harm, but the crooked will be suddenly destroyed. Standard old covenant understanding there. A hard worker has plenty of food, but a person who chases fantasies ends up in poverty. And there's a certain person I have in mind, and when he passed away, he left a few $100s. He ended up in poverty. And the only reason he wasn't in the hole was because of how often he declared bankruptcy. The trustworthy person will get a rich reward, but a person who wants quick riches will get into trouble. Showing partiality is never good, yet some will do wrong for a mere piece of bread. Greedy people try to get rich quick, but don't realize they're headed for poverty. Greed can do that. In the end, people appreciate honest criticism far more than flattery. Well, wise people anyway. You can tell when people are being honest. You can tell when they're being fake in order to gain favor and to look good. And if somebody that you know loves you and cares about you criticizes you honestly, you can take that better than to listen to the flattery of somebody you know doesn't mean it. Anyone who steals from his father and mother and says, "What's wrong with that?" is no better than a murderer. Imagine that case coming before Solomon. Greed causes fighting. Trusting the Lord leads to prosperity. Those who trust their own insight are foolish, but anyone who walks in wisdom is safe. Whoever gives to the poor will lack nothing, but those who close their eyes to poverty will be cursed. When the wicked take charge, people go into hiding. We read that earlier. When the wicked meet disaster, the godly flourish. Maybe a bit of standard Old Covenant understanding going on there. Well, we ran over a little bit, but then last week we ran short. So we've gotten through 4 Proverbs. There are 3 left. And we might kind of have some fun next week with these remaining Proverbs. There are the sayings of Agur, there's the sayings of Lemuel, and there's the passage about the virtuous woman, or the VW. Yeah, hearkening back to a long time ago there. So, that is it for this week, and we've run over a little bit. I think it's time for us to wrap this up and invite you to join us next week when hopefully we'll be able to complete the book of Proverbs. And until then, we say goodbye and God bless.